Okay, so I got cut off on that last video. I ran out of space on the camera right in the middle of a flow, and then I just recorded it, and I don't know. So I'm just gonna try to, I've sort of lost the energy for it, but I'm just gonna try to simplify this as much as possible. So you can't fight the mind. You can short term, but it won't move you towards God. It won't move you towards healing. Repression, suppression, oppositional energy to the mind tends to reinforce it. It's not the best use of your energy. Running from the mind, being averse, or kowtowing, being submitted to the mind. You know, the mind is a terrible master, that kind of thing. That also is not healthy or good. And so the third path really is surrendering to God. And what that is, surrender just means stopping. And it's not really a technique. It's not really a 3-step process. It's stopping. It's surrendering. It's a recognition that there is a context within which your thoughts arise, in which ultimately all experience arises. It arises within, you could say, God. It arises within consciousness, within awareness. And through inquiry, you can recognize your continuity with that. Where does awareness begin and that which I seem to be end? Is there any separation between the I that I take myself to be and consciousness? Are there any boundaries there? You can start to inquire into that and disidentify in a sense. But that's what you surrender into, and that's when you stop, when you really stop, the most physical, superficial level of just letting your body rest, your bones, your muscles, your nervous system, laying it all down. It's not about analysis. It's not about even being aloof. They talk about, be the observer. In one sense, you could say you can disidentify backwards into pure, formless subjectivity, awareness, pure being, the subject to which all experience is object. It sort of relativizes the absolute and the relative. So you can, in one sense, and that can be helpful, stepping back into formlessness. That which is perpetually prior, free from any category, any object. But it's not really about that in this. Ultimately, that needs to be surrendered too. You let go of that too. It's like you surrender back into relativity, you surrender back to these objects, not into an identification with them, but it's like the context becomes so vast that there's space for these things to start to move. It's like pouring out a cup that has a cup filled with maybe the tiniest amount of water, the cup being you, who you take yourself to be, water being the sense of freedom or being, and this cup is filled with maybe just a tiny little surface of water, and the rest is dirt. And that's all the frozen crap we've got inside of us. If you take yourself to be the cup, then that's a very claustrophobic, tight, uncomfortable place to be. But if you were to dump out that cup into the ocean, the sand kind of just dissolves, disperses, until there's just the radiance or the pure liquidity of ocean. That's just one metaphor. It's not perfect, but so you're dropping back into this other context, or you're allowing a deeper context to come forward. Or even just surrendering into the possibility of a bigger context. You recognize that thoughts come and go, all experience comes and goes. You do not come and go. So who are you? Who are you? That's the fundamental question. Not as a thought, not as any reference point in the mind, but in direct experience. So that starts to open things up. Now the thought's going to bark at you, or the mind is going to bark at you, especially if you've been very identified, as most of us have been, giving a lot of your identity, identification, energy, awareness to thought. If you've been living in that kind of polluted upper level, ruminations, neurosis. So when you stop and you say, well, I don't deny that you're part of my experience, but are you the totality, or is there something bigger here? There are more layers. So you stop and you start to experiment, and you're willing to feel and you're willing to burn. So the mind will grow louder and louder. It has so many strategies to keep the defense mechanisms locked into place. Very subtle thoughts come up. Oh, you can't do this. This is dangerous, or you really need to take care of this, or you really need to do this, or there's just so many, you almost want to say sinister, but there's just so many strategies the mind has. But whatever comes up, you allow it, you don't engage with it, you don't really stay aloof from it either. In a sense, it can be helpful to have, in addition to this, just full rest, this stop, muscles, lay down your body, lay down your mind. It can be helpful to feel a kind of global abiding, a global presence, a global felt sense of the body, to inhabit the body, not in a very forceful, willful way, but just as best as you can to, feel your feet, feel your legs, feel your hands, come down in a sense into the body, or let your awareness bloom in the body, wake up in the body. That happens more and more as you do this, but so you surrender into peace, trusting that the mind is not the totality of who you are, that you're actually a much larger context, but it will fill up the screen of your consciousness and yell and yell and yell. Eventually it will subside like a tidal wave. It'll crest and it will subside. And on the other side of that, some of the deeper stuff, deeper layers can come up. Grief, the pain, the sorrow, the fear, the anxiety, the loneliness, etc., etc. And that's the gold, ultimately. That's where you heal. That's where you cry. If you're crying, if you're shaking, if you're having intense energies move up and out, you can hold yourself, whatever feels comfortable to the nervous system, to allow this stuff to release. It's like all these split off parts of ourselves that didn't get the attention that they needed, that weren't able to express, that weren't able to shake off the bad interaction, or weren't able to cry, or weren't able to feel held. So that's the work you're doing now, and that heals and that helps release it. But again, emotional energetic release is a sign that you're getting to the deeper layers, and that's good. And so that's the third path: learning to burn, surrendering. And it's not about defeating the mind. The mind dissolves more and more through that work. The mind is just a neurotic reflection of deeper distortions, deeper dysfunctions. And it's like if you have something at the bottom of the well, this is kind of crude example, but like a dead animal or something that's putrefying, rotting. There's got to be a better example. Well, I'll just say this. And of course, at the surface level, you're going to get that toxicity and that, what would be the word? Biohazard. You're going to be able to measure, and it's going to float up right to the surface. But to really clean it, you got to go down to the surface and get the toxic stuff out, the frozen stuff. That's not a great analogy. Another analogy could be, you have the sun, the radiance, the effulgence of God, consciousness, unbound omnipotentiality, eternity, and you've taken up an identity that's become kind of ossified, rigid, taken up some kind of, there's been some kind of a restriction. It's a good word for that. Yeah, I mean, you've been hurt, you've had some kind of traumatic event, or there's some kind of frozen object, frozen energy in your field that blocks the radiance of the sun. Now on the surface level, you're going to experience a shadow. But if you go to the shadow and you try to wipe away the shadow, or you try to I think that's pretty simple, obvious. You won't be able to get rid of the shadow by addressing it at the surface level. The shadow is kind of a reflection, in a sense, of a deeper blockage. So once you remove that blockage, then the shadow dissipates. And the shadow is kind of the mind. The mind is this reflection of deeper dysfunction, deeper pain, blockages, opacity to God's light. So the more you heal those opaque parts, those dense parts, that's a better word, the more transparent, diaphanous your experience becomes, your being becomes, the more light can come through, the more the shadows dissipate. That's all the mind is just a shadow. But just knowing that, just saying that isn't enough. You have to heal it where the blockage is so that the light can come through. So again, it's just about surrender. It's a willingness to surrender. It's a willingness to burn. You are not your mind. the final analysis, you could say the mind is an aspect of who you are, but the actual role that the mind has, the discursive mind, is just the filmiest, thinnest veneer that just, in truth, is needed very, very rarely. It takes on such an outsized role in our lives. And there isn't, you don't want to, in the final analysis, you don't want to denigrate any aspect of creation. You want to live in an integrated way, but you have to have a properly ordered universe. And God comes first, God's being. And being in the more subtle layers, that's the foundation. The mind is just this small little function, almost to the point of being unnecessary. Can play a role in just some very basic things, but much less, much less than it does now for most people. There's a much deeper intelligence and more natural way to move. The mind wants to just gobble up all the bandwidth and usurp and take over all the decision-making process. It wants to complicate everything. It wants to destroy. I hate to say it. I mean, that's not the fullest truth, but man, you look at the havoc that the mind wreaks on humanity, on creation. You don't want to overly reify the mind also, and I'm kind of doing that. But sometimes you need kind of a counterbalancing energy to snap you out of it or to wake you up out of it. Anyways, the mind ultimately is a part of creation. It is a part of your being. But the bandwidth that it occupies in a more healthy state is a much narrower bandwidth. And who you are is much vaster, much deeper. Yeah, I haven't said it perfectly. I never say it perfectly. Afterwards, I always have my own kind of neurotic things about, I should have said this, and why did I say that? So anyways, may you be well.